I'm Rebecca Morgan, better known as Becky. I was elected to the Board of Supervisors in 1980 when I ran against the mayor of Cupertino, Jim Jackson, and a young student, Hal Plotkin, who is now Deputy Secretary of Education for the country. The good news is we're all still friends. I left the Board of Supervisors at the end of 1984 after being elected to the California State Senate. During that time, I came onto the board with Zoe Lofgren, and we made, as women, a majority of the Board of Supervisors for the first time. Zoe Lofgren, Susie Wilson, and I were the three who elected Sally Reed to be county manager, county executive, on a 3-2 vote, which was still the right thing to do. During that time, we had budget problems, not the number of zeros that we have today, because the budget at that time was about $700 million. But nevertheless, it was another small recession compared to the last couple years. And in 81 and 82, we had to cut budgets, which was always very painful. And I can remember being in the coffee shop with Sally Reed, being pretty upset about what we were having to cut out for children and for the most vulnerable, as they were called, and telling her I didn't know when I got elected I was going to have to play God. But that's what you have to do when the money isn't there. During the time, I think some of the things I'm most proud of is the fact that Route 85 had been a dotted line on the map of Santa Clara County from 1957. In 1983, I called together the advisory committee of representatives from the cities in the West Valley, and we started the planning for Route 85. It took 14 years to be completed, but as I drive it to Carmel and Monterey and Santa Cruz, I, for one, am sure glad that it's there, and I get lots of positive feedback from other, what were constituents, now friends. In 1984, when I was running for the Senate, I was accused of using it as a political act, and chose to relieve the chairmanship of that committee to someone else, because it was more important to me to have 85 built than it was to have any political gain. And I guess that's what I was sort of known for on the Board of Supervisors, was, as had been the case when I was on the Palo Alto Board of Education, problem solving and finding solutions was a lot more important than what it might do to my reputation. It didn't hurt, because I was elected in 1984 to the state Senate. I'm someone who made the jump from a dairy farmer's daughter in Vermont to the wife of an executive here in Silicon Valley. Jim Morgan was CEO and chairman of Applied Materials. It's very interesting how the economy has changed. In a clipping I saw, Applied Materials in 1980 had revenues of $88 million. They're a multi-billion-dollar company today. So it's been a journey. It was a journey as I went back to Stanford Business School after 16 years out of Cornell University. So my MBA not only gave me a job at Bank of America, but provided the fiscal, the planning, the strategic experience that I felt was really important. And I think that was a selling point, frankly, in my elected life, that I had an unusual background for somebody running for office. And I felt that I could use that educational experience and a locally elected experience as a school board member to a positive effect for the county. In addition to Route 85, which I'm proud of having initiated, we had to build a new county jail. And it was obvious nobody wants a county jail in their backyard. But it was the year in 1983 when I was chairman of the board that I took on the leadership to plan for a new county jail. And I always remember my conversation with Janet Gray Hayes, who was mayor of San Jose at the time, and explaining that it was necessary, that we were going to be penalized for the conditions in our jail, and that we had to build a new one somewhere. And I was proposing we build it on Heading, where the old jail was located. And I always remember she said, well, it sounds like you're going to build it, so I might as well agree as to where. And that's where it is today. And instead of being across the street, so there had to be a pathway across Heading for the between the court personnel and the jail personnel. We built it where there was easier access and turned the other side of Heading into a parking lot. So those were two biggies during my tenure. It was also the beginning of what became the children's shelter, which has since been closed. But when a public defender said to me if something happened to him, he would rather his child be taken care of by the probation department than social services, I said, we need to do something about this. And so I started the first advisory group for homeless and abandoned children. And it was an advisory group at first. We recruited like grandmothers to come in and be with these children. And so we started an advisory committee, brought older people in to be with the children when they were in homes, and then started the process for building the children's shelter. And my successor, Diane McKenna, and her husband led the effort to continue that. And it is no longer in service because philosophies change about how children whose parents are no longer caring for them should be taken care of. And now trying to get more and more to live with a family through the Family Finders program here in Santa Clara County, which I'm very pleased with. You know, one of the things that we weren't successful with was trying to do a regional garbage disposal. You know, finding the land for it. And we hired somebody in from Florida who led the effort for a couple years. He wasn't a good match culturally to Silicon Valley, and the cities were much opposed to any of the suggestions that we came up with. And so that was probably something I worked on fairly hard that didn't succeed. In the meantime, recycling got started, and many of the city managers supported the efforts in recycling. I remember one city manager, who will remain unnamed, who just thought it was a terrible idea. But I think in retrospect, we see how much landfill has been saved by the efforts of recycling our papers and glasses and cans and so on. So that was rocky, but not as rocky as having to go through budget cuts for all programs. And I remember the year that we cut $1 million out of the Sheriff's Department. That was not easy. And thank goodness Sally Reed was a good negotiator. I think a bit of my history, I was one of 3 women out of the 5 supervisors. I was the only Republican on the board during my 4 years. Now, I consider myself a pretty moderate Republican and have since left the party because the party left me, is my view. But there was not a lot of dialogue with the other supervisors, but there were, you know, relatively good working relationships. Probably one of the controversies that I remember was when the county was talking about building a golf course down at Santa Teresa, which had been private. And I had another Bank of America former employee, as was I, doing the financials for me. And it became obvious that there was no money being made at that golf course. And a supervisor who was really pushing it, and I had a sense might be getting a kickback, really got very upset with me. But I said, you know, 0 times 0 is still 0. And if there is no profit being made, the county will not be making any money, but will have a major expenditure being the owner of this golf course. There were finally 3 votes to kill the idea. I have reviewed a few of the editorials and my speech when I became chairman of the board in 1983. I think I would have voted for myself. in retrospect. And I have to say I have been treated very well by the press during my 18 years as an elected official, because I always felt that reporters were human beings too. And they had a job to do, and if I was honest with them, they would report accurately about me. And so I have a very good feeling about the press that I got over the years. And what I'm pleased is that they recognized that I was honest, that I was hardworking, that I was a problem solver, and really had great integrity. And those are characteristics that I'm proud of. I think most of the projects that I took a leadership role in became successful. What was interesting was that we could build a new jail in 4 years. It took 14 years to build a highway, and the children's shelter had to be built with personal funds. So there's those kinds of differences in how things become successful that I found very fascinating as to priorities, if you will. Which bothers me to this day, that we're putting more money into prisons and jails than we are into children on a relative basis. Those were the kind of the issues that I struggled with, was how we care for our children as opposed to how we care for the people once they've committed a crime. You know, my experience as a county supervisor, having served on a school board and been an assistant vice president at Bank of America, was frankly the most satisfying, I think, of the 3 levels of elected office that I've held, having gone on to the state senate, because I still knew the people that I was working with from Palo Alto to Saratoga, the North County District 5. They were issues that were tangible, and I liked that, and you could see accomplishments. And so those 4 years, while I worked full-time at it, I always, every couple years, counted up how many hours I was working, and it was pretty average, 55 to 60 hours a week, plus the commute time from North County, where we also had an office at that time in Palo Alto, which kept me in touch with the local constituents. But it was a good 4 years. I'm proud of the service. I'm proud of the things that we were able to accomplish, and I'm sorry there are still financial problems.